This is Ali from Scots, Whay. And before we get into the latest podcast properly, I just wanted to give a brief explanation about what you're about to hear. Because before we get into the full podcast, which is an interview with Edwin and Morgan from the band Half Formed Things, there are also two bits of music which we don't mention in the podcast. First up is The Apostate, and then at the end of the podcast you'll hear To Walk Freely, and both are tracks from their amazing album To Live in the Flicker. Undoubtedly one of my albums of the year so far, and you'll hear me fawning more during the podcast itself. It was a fascinating discussion, as you're about to hear. So without further ado, you're going to hear The Apostate, and then myself, Edwin and Morgan talking about half-formed things. I hope you enjoy.
Oh my Lord, it's never been the same, and so it goes. I'll never run all the way to you, to you, to you.
And welcome to another Scots Whay podcast. And today I'm talking to Edwin and Morgan from Half Formed Things. Hello both.
Hello.
Hi.
And to say it's just the two of you, Nici and Matthew are not here today, so they can give their side of the story at another day too. If you disagree with anything, feel free to have your right of reply.
I'm sure they will.
I'm here to talk to you. Ostensibly, your debut album, To Live in the Flicker, is out. But also, I'm excited because I'm a big fan of the band, as you know.
Sure.
So this could be like 40 minutes of me just telling me how you did it.
I can take that.
So before we get into details and all that, I'm interested in names with you guys, because Half Formed Things, where does that come from?
Sure. So it comes from the novel A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing. It's I don't know how to describe it. It's lyrical, it's beautiful, it's devastating,
It chronicles her lifespan from the smallest, most minuscule thought patterns as an infant, and then kind of progresses as she grows older, and it's her witnessing her family's life.
Yeah, and
Now that from that, I actually think I do know the book you mean. I haven't read it. I mean, if it hasn't been released in Scotland in the last 10 years, the chances are I haven't read it.
Sure.
But I know the one.
McBride.
That's right, Emir McBride.
Was it Emir?
And it was.
I think so.
Right. Okay.
And right, so that's interesting. That does make me want to go and read it. And I have heard it is a very powerful book.
It's
stunning.
quite something. Yeah.
Very, very.
But that's where the band's name came from, because Morgan had a copy of it. In her you had a copy of it on your bedside all the time. It was just kind of sitting there all the time back when the band first started coming together.
It goes to show the amount of times I tried to read it.
yeah totally. And we would be hanging out there, and so I kind of just absorbed, because I just thought it was a wonderful phrase, a girl is a half-formed thing. That just kind of stuck. So I kind of absorbed that passively, and I did try reading the book and have tried reading it a couple of times since, obviously, especially after we named a band after it. I felt obliged to. But so when it came to the band naming process, it's quite funny. We've never talked about this, so I think my recollection of it might be a little bit skewed. I'm going to test the water with this just now.
Okay.
As far as I remember, when we were in the naming band stage, which is always brutal for any band, I'm fairly certain I initially pitched you. I think it was quite late one night, so I think maybe you were like, just past it, and I just went, how about half-formed things, and you were just kind of like, oh yeah, and I was just like, oh, she's not into that, so I never brought it up ever again. And then we were talking about it as a group, and I was like, we were at a complete dead end, and we're like, yeah, we're never gonna find a name for this band. I can't remember any of the alternatives. I'm sure they were terrible, and then I'm like, yeah, I wish you guys were more into half-formed things, because I quite liked that. And then you were like, that's excellent, we need to do it. And I was like, what? So yeah, as far as I remember, the first time it just kind of misfired, and then the second time all of a sudden it just kind of clicked.
It
and we
sounds
all got
incredibly
it.
plausible, so I'm going to say that.
Yeah.
I like this idea that it's now required reading for the rest of the band here.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, I certainly thought back when the band was more of an abstract idea, when the band was more of a creative aspiration than an actual concrete thing. I certainly thought, because the prose in that book is very lyrical, it kind of pushes into abstraction to a point where it's almost it's lyrical, and there was something it wasn't a tangible thing per se, but I had a vague idea where I was like, something about that that's a benchmark for the band, whether it's we're writing songs about these kind of issues, or whether it's we're writing songs with this kind of approach to lyrics, or whatever. I definitely felt there was a connection there between us and the book. I don't know if we, it's kind of a lofty thing to put out there, because
It kind of doesn't surprise me, because I will talk about this a bit more, but it seems to me that all of these things really matter to you.
Oh, absolutely.
And
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think also from the very beginning we were quite intent on making sure that our collective feminist views were at the forefront of our writing process, and our representation also when we played live. It's always been something that we have heavily emphasized, or at least tried to, in our dynamic privately, and also when we're showcasing our music. It should probably also be said that Matthew and I started the band initially after. In fact, it was your band with Matthew, A Fight You Can't Win, disbanded. And Matthew had said to me at the time, when this is finished, you and I should do some music. And, he'd always had in his head that he was going to end up doing some sort of alt country type thing. To which, I joyfully, accepted, and we had a couple of initial meetings, and bashed out a couple of bits and pieces, and in fact actually Edwin and I met officially met quite soon after this, actually.
Yeah. There's one song on the record that the first song,
the
Flicker,
first song,
that technically predates me joining the band.
Yeah.
Technically, it was
our first song.
It was the song. It was more or less the song that sold me on the band, because the idea of me joining Matthew and I's prior band, which was a punk band called The Fight You Can't Win, we'd been going for about 2.5 years, and then it just kind of petered out a little bit. We had some people leave, and then we hit a bit of a wall with it. So I was no longer in a full-time kind of writing, touring band anymore, and I wasn't really sure if I wanted to jump back into a band with sort of the same group of musicians or people I collaborated with before. So I was quite resistant to it. And then Morgan and Matthew played The Flicker, which only existed back then, I believe.
It was just the chorus.
It only existed as the chorus, which is the outro, the loud outro of that song on record. And you played it at a New Year's party.
Yeah, that's right.
Because one of our friends had a piano, so you both kind of mashed it out.
Yeah.
And it was very different in feel. There was a lot more...
the pace was totally different.
Yeah, the pace was very different. The whole blueprint was a lot different to what happened. I feel like I kind of ruined the blueprint to some extent.
Although if you listen back to the original demo, it's actually, it's definitely evolved since then. But there's certainly strong threads from that era. I feel like it's a totally different era.
Yeah, completely. Things found very natural, which happens a lot with any creative project. I think it's cute when people try to over conceptualize things and go, I'm going to do a band that sounds like this, but then as soon as you bring different minds together, the end result, it's never what you think it's going to be.
Which is exactly what happened.
Yeah, and sometimes that's a good thing.
Totally, it's exactly what
other
happened.
times people fight against that, and you end up in this toing and froing identity crisis kind of thing. And thankfully because the initial concept, so this is deviating somewhat, but the initial concept for Half-Formed Things, the forced intellectualized concept, at very least on my part, was, we could sound like Low and stuff like that. We could be really quiet. And I think from
Really?
Oh yeah, specifically. I mean, I think for me, a big part of the novelty value from that was having come from a punk band, and the idea of not even slowcore, but quietcore, where it's what if we try to make the quietest music we can? Because I'm a big fan of Talk Talk. I'm a big fan of, in particular, Mark Hollis's solo album that he did after Talk Talk, which is one of the quietest records ever. It's earth-shatteringly quiet. It's so quiet, it's loud. And that dynamic's always kind of intrigued me. I'm not very good at it, as anyone who's seen us live knows. But
I can't imagine you playing the drums quietly.
No, indeed. but when we started, that was very much the kind of the circle we were trying to push the square into.
Right.
And I think we were pretty much in denial about it
totally doomed
until
from the outset. I mean, come on.
Yeah, we were in denial about it right up until our first gig, where we had a bit of a, we had some disagreements with the sound guy there, and he just said, well, you guys just sound like a wall of sound.
If that's what you're going for.
If that's what you're going for, that's fine. And we were mortified. We were like, oh my god, because we wanted everything to sound, and we do want things to sound super nuanced, but we weren't ready for the idea that we were a loud band, and everyone who saw us was like, wow, that was loud as hell, because I was still playing like I had just quit a punk band a year ago, because I had. And that was a moment where we kind of realised the natural process that was going on, the natural collision that was happening, and started to let that happen. And from then, the band's identity just kind of revealed itself.
Definitely, there was a lot of resistance to what actually was really. But to bring this all back around, Stu joined the band not long after. Sorry, I've said Stu because that's what everybody calls you. Edwin joined the band after not actually that long after we started dating, and we very fast realised that as a direct result, things had started moving at a very different pace, and the process of kind of unpicking what Matthew and I had originally decided, or at least laid down as what was going to be the foundation for this alt gothic country band, was very much never going to happen. And that was actually a really great thing, because what happened after Edwin joined was we, I think, solidified a passion for bringing forth the beauty between fragility and the might behind what you can do when you go mental with your instrument. And therein lies the roller coaster of your emotional palette. And
Sure.
there's very much of, I don't know how to say what I'm thinking. there's so much in that with our relationship as a unit as well, especially now with the introduction of my sister, who joined almost 2 years ago.
Well, almost 2 years ago.
Almost 2 years ago. Because the dynamic between myself and Edwin and Matt was already very close. Obviously, Edwin and I had started our relationship. A year into our relationship, we moved in with each other, and our flat became band HQ, and Matthew was 15 minutes walk down the road, and everyone was always at our house. And Nici, my sister, was always around regardless anyway. And so when she did some guest vocals on Embers, which I think we released in 2018, 2017?
No, 2017.
2017. It was not like, because I'd actually mentioned to Edwin quite a few times before, I really think Nici would be a good addition to the band, and I think he was very protective of the dynamic that we had with Matthew, and the idea of expanding that was quite sort of difficult to imagine, I think, more than anything else. But it wasn't until we worked together and there was that click between us, not just as musicians, but the closeness of our friendship and our relationships has very much informed the emotional landscape of our music, I think.
Definitely.
I think that's something you can see when you play live. I think you can hear it in the music as well. No, because I think there's an understanding and a sense of trust, I think, more than anything else. And I'll try to explain that. Because you do play loud. And I think, having known other bands, that when you play, often someone says, "Oh, you were playing too loud tonight," or "You were doing that," or there's some kind of tension that you can sense. I've seen it with bands where, "Oh, could you turn this guy's guitar down?" or "Could you turn..." And I might have missed it, but I don't get that with you. I think everyone gets a kind of equal... I'm really interested in the whole structure of the band, in the way that different instruments take their turn at the front, and this is on record as well as live. You'll get the drums might be a lead instrument, or the piano is a lead instrument, or the harmonies become the lead instrument. And I guess what you're saying makes a lot of sense, because you always have to be a unit as close as you're suggesting for that to work.
Well, we decided really early on that it was important to. I mean, it was naturally, and it was incredibly important to us that there was no hierarchy, and that our unit was very much even, and that was represented. So, me saying before that we were very. We felt it was very important that when we represented ourselves, that there was, and it might seem nitpicky, but that the display between male and female vocals was 50-50, and that there was never one instrument that took the lead, because it's a democracy. It's something that we're all passionately contributing our absolute all to, and so it makes no sense for something to push forward when everyone else is equally contributing.
The ultimate visual representation of that is our stage setup.
That's true.
Which is an arc. So everyone is either at the front or at the centre. There's no, which people, we've gotten to a stage now where we've done it enough that people are identifying it as a thing we do. And which is interesting, because it resonates with people, particularly women. as recently as the show we played in Glasgow last weekend,
We've
had people saying, I like how there's no hierarchy in how you arrange yourselves on stage. At that show we were just in a straight line across the way, which is good for me because it feels like it's carrying across, because it's not so much a message as it is just a framework through which the band is best understood. I feel like if you were to approach us, because everything you listen to benefits from a framework to listen to it through. I think if you listen to Nick Cave through the framework of this being music, latter era Nick Cave, through the framework of this is heavily lyrical and it's Nick Cave's band. So if there's 5 verses in this song and nothing really happens, I'm not going to be surprised by that. I get it. It's the same with Half Formed Things, because not exclusively or as a general rule, but generally speaking, there's never lead instrumentation. It's just a big wall of stuff going on. There are some exceptions to that, inevitably. But so when you listen to it through a particular lens, you won't be surprised by the voice changing every 5 seconds. You won't be surprised by the lack of guitar solos and the way in which mix-wise things kind of sit at a similar level, that sort of thing. And the stage setup is kind of like the ultimate visual representation of that fact. It's like, this is what we're about. You can see before we start playing.
I mean, because everyone is playing their instruments at the top of their game, but as you say, there's not someone who goes, right, and now it's time for the drum solo, or now it's, in fact, almost seems gauche to suggest that you would do that.
Hilariously enough, he has actually started doing that.
Interestingly, I've started doing drum solos at shows, but
it's working really well, I have to say.
It's working really well, but I understand exactly what you mean. Yes, yeah. No, totally.
And I was interested, I'd heard the individual tracks and I could see how it translated to record, but to hear it over a whole album is something else. And how did you come to approach doing the album, something that you'd done, been doing live for a wee while?
It's quite interesting. It happened in a very natural way. You couldn't have... I said this... I can't remember where I said this. I said this recently with an interview we did. You couldn't do an album like ours with a band that functioned any differently to how we function. And that's not just in terms of songwriting hierarchy or the absence of such. It's also just to do with the pace we work at and how we approach songs. We very much coax songs out. There's a loose hierarchy, there's a loose structure with myself almost as the kind of curator, producer of stuff, and everyone else as the people that make the musical bits. And there's blurring between those lines. But so from my perspective, the album was something that in my head was being gradually curated over time, kind of like a garden almost. It was, that sounds terrible.
No, I'm liking it.
That sounds like absolute guff, but it was cultivated in a sense. So there are songs on the album that, for example, The Flicker, the first track on the album, is the bones of that essentially predate me joining the band. Old, we're talking 2015.
Well, I wrote it in like 2006.
Yeah, sure. Well, you wrote the riff in 2006, and then so bones of that existed before I joined. There's a couple other songs, The One You Hate and Among Men, that existed as riffs and bits and bobs round about when I joined, and we kind of jammed on them for a while. We've never worked on a basis of, because there's no principal songwriter, generally speaking, very few of the songs come pre-packaged, or I've written this song, can you put some music to it or anything like that. Usually it's just bits. Usually those bits gradually start to accumulate character, and things refine themselves over time. But I think it's also because we kind of move at a glacial pace relative to other bands I've been in before. We go quite slow and we take our time with stuff. We don't force things.
Allow things to gestate.
But I think that's admirable, and it's one thing I was going to bring up. It seems that you, whether it's just the way you've decided to work, it sounds like it is, you're not going to be rushed into anything. You're not going to, so it would have been 2017 I first heard you, I reckon.
Yes.
And and you think, oh, I want to hear more, and I want to hear more now. But it's good that it's just, we're going to wait till we are absolutely happy with this. And I think that probably goes for everything around it.
Yes.
When I mentioned that you take these things seriously, I'm thinking also of things like album covers. You've already spoken about the way you are on stage. You've also the philosophy, for want of a better term, behind the band and all of those things. And it's quite a big thing to be able to all agree that this is the direction that we're going.
Well, I mean, the thing is that, at least from my perspective, my disposition is not towards taking my time with stuff on a kind of gut basis. I have another band that I do vocals in called Brittany, which is
plug.
Which is like it's just insane communist mathcore. It's hard to explain what Brittany is. It's great fun. But we, at least when we started, and this was round about the time just before Half Formed Things started. We were doing a record every year,
right?
And I like working like that. Again, instinctively, I think that's something I'm drawn towards. But with Half Formed Things, there was this understanding that there was a correct or a best way for us to work, and I resisted that for at least the first couple of years of us existing.
Yeah,
I was getting cold feet very quickly, very early on when the band. The reason we released our first ever 3-track EP in 2016, so that was like our first year. Was because even within our first year, I was getting cold feet, and I was like, we're not doing anything. We need to do a record, because for me, the record is always the most exciting part of the process. So we did that basically to start cementing stuff and start gears turning and start things moving. So for the album to subsequently take another 3 years was
very against the grain for you.
Very against the grain for me. But so it was this conflict between what I understood to be the best way for us to work versus how I wanted to push things.
Yeah.
So it's actually not so much a process that we all happen to. It's not so much a process that we all happen to work
on.
It's a process we all agree on rationally.
Yeah.
I think it's not necessarily how we all work naturally.
No, I don't think
but so. We have an understanding.
Yeah.
Well, it comes back to this idea of perhaps the greater good. You can say that
Absolutely.
I think this is a really
Definitely.
special relationship we've got here, and therefore I'll put aside perhaps what my instincts are to kind of work for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that we all have a very unique bond with each other, individually as well. Like, of course, Matthew's been in a band with Edwin, for...
We can work around that. People have worked it out by now. There's only 3 of us around the table.
It just comes too naturally, I'm sorry.
I am asking a pretty annoying thing of everyone who's ever known me for longer than a few years.
It's true.
So yeah.
It's alright. I respect your decision, and I'm trying. Matthew had been in a band with Edwin for, obviously, I think, you were in that band for 3 years together?
Thereabouts, yeah.
Thereabouts. And so, of course, Matthew's quite used to the way that Edwin works, and because you also produced the latter records for A Fight You Can't Win. And then, of course, Nici and I, who have obviously grown up together, we listen to music in a very, very, very similar way.
Right.
We approach music in a very similar way. It's very much down to our father's influence. He's also a wonderful musician. He plays guitar. And our mother, who has... She says she has no musical ability, but I know for a fact she used to play guitar. But she has one of the best ears I think I've ever heard. Yeah. And they, together both instilled quite a... I think quite a well-rounded way of listening to music that I find to be quite precious, especially considering it's something I share with my sister. It's another level, because she's easily my best friend as well.
Yeah.
And then of course Edwin and I have started up this relationship, and Matthew and I have been friends for years, and Nicci's been introduced into this friend group, and so all across purposes we're trying to cultivate this thing. And I think it took quite a long time, because like you were saying, the the way that it ended up working was very much against the grain, and we were all trying to honour all of these beautiful connections that we had whilst also trying to work creatively together with very, very, very different processes. And for Nici and I, processes that had not even begun to actually be understood even by ourselves, because Nici and I had never been in bands before. I was a bedroom shower musician. You know, I never did anything or showed anyone anything unless it was drawn out of me or if I'd had a couple of drinks. Like, it was very limited. And so here I am trying to work with these, from my perspective, seasoned musicians, and they're incredibly frustrated for me because I'm like, no, it's not perfect yet, you know?
I think this is really interesting, and I think it there's lots of things about your sound I'm interested in, like, we haven't talked about influences yet and things like that, but it appears to me from what you're saying is, like, in a lot of bands, if someone goes, oh, I don't like what, you know, the guitar player's doing, let's get another guitar player. But your relationships are fundamentally important to
you. Absolutely.
You know, that we, for obvious reasons,
the band
you know.
wouldn't exist unless we'd all found a mutual emotional respect and connection first.
But it almost forces you to say, no, we have to make, we stop the band completely, or we have to make the band work, because we have to be
absolutely.
together. And it's a really interesting dynamic. And I have to say, as a fan, I actually really like the fact that there's been, you know, a track out and then not much, and then another track out, because it reminds me of when I first started getting into music, and you kind of become obsessed by a band, and you kind of go, oh, when's the next thing out? And you have to wait, you know, and it's not just all, well, here's the whole back catalogue in one fell swoop, and you get through that. So I'm interested by influences, because I've reviewed a lot of bands over the years, and there's not many where I first hear them, I think, I don't think that sounds like anything else I've heard of. Yes, I can get little bits and pieces, but as a whole, this sounds completely fresh to me. How do you think about your own sound? Do you know the influences? Can you go, yeah, that's a bit of a talk thing, or that's a bit of a whatever?
Maybe to an extent. I mean, it's very I think Half-Horn Things to me is the closest any band I've ever been in has come to kind of wiping out the musical individualism that kind of breaks bands, that separates good bands from great bands. We struggle with it, but we're doing better at it than any band I've ever been in before.
Right.
You know, there's a huge. It's like when you hear stuff like Steve Reich, like drumming compositions. It's like the people putting aside individualism, not individuality, but individualism in favour of group expression, which is like this higher thing. Because of that, our relationship with our music is quite interesting, because to a certain extent, it's why I find it very, because I do the marketing and such for the band, I actually find it quite easy, because there's almost it applies to production as well, a certain degree of removal between me and the music to an extent, which is interesting, because I pour everything I've got into it, but there's to a great extent it exists out with me, and I think that's the same for all of us, because we're invoking things, we're letting things naturally flow, and the end result, it's the same with improvised music as well. Even though our music is not in any way improvised, we're kind of the opposite extreme. You listen back to it, you don't remember doing it, and you're like, oh, it's like listening to someone else. It's the same with us all listening to these bits of music and trying to steer it in its natural direction. It's almost like it's organically living outside of you, which is a long, and what I'm saying in a long-winded way is that our influences, or the things we identify as influences, tend to come after the fact, and they tend to be completely subjective. It's when we sit and talk about our music, it's like modern art crit or something. Like we're all kind of we're all kind of retroactively going. We never
set out.
We have never ever set out
sound like something else.
Yeah, we have never ever once set out. Which I don't mean in a kind of like self-conscious, it's bad to do that. It's not bad at all to do that. I love doing that. I love going, I want to be
absolutely.
in a band. I want to be in a band that sounds like Kate Bush or whatever. That's great. But we've literally never done that. We just do stuff, and then afterwards we go, oh, I'm getting bits of talk, I'm getting bits of this.
Yeah.
And that
it's interesting as a reviewer, because often you'll hear a band and you go, well, I have to compare this to something because that's what people expect in a review. And with some bands it's easier than others, and with you it was particularly difficult. But then I thought, well, let's turn this into a positive, because you think that here's a band that you know are going to give you something new.
I think it was an incredibly beautiful compliment that we received, that I think we've kept repeating, and it's awful because I can't actually remember who said it. So if the person who said it is listening to this, please tell us it was you, so we can, keep you in our hearts forever. But somebody told me that it sounded timeless to them. And I think it was quite an interesting lens to view our music through, because it changed it for me, thinking about what we were writing and saying, okay, well, yeah, actually they were right, because I can hear 70s here, and I can hear 80s here, and I can hear 90s here, and then there's something from so many eras in a lot of the different tracks, and I think that's a really beautiful thing to have, and I'm incredibly grateful for it. And I'm incredibly grateful to the person who said that to us. Because you're right, it's not often that you find that you're kind of lost for a way to describe what it is that you're doing, because it seems like the kind of thing that you should have down pat. If somebody says to you, what's your music like, which we get asked all the time, and every single time everyone hesitates, because
it's not
we're just not quite sure how to, like, how do you describe it in a succinct way that's going to make it land for you, because I know what it sounds like, and I know the words that would tick those boxes in my brain, but I've got no idea how to tell that to you, really.
And in a way, that's what you should do. You say, well, I don't know, what do you think? Because each listener will find something different in it, or not care, and just go, no, I just really like it.
Yeah, for sure. That's been, if there's one thing, obviously this is getting into just me circle jerking over my own band. Like I don't want it to seem that way, but if there was one, but I am very proud of the music we make, and if there's one thing that I'm most proud of about the band, and I feel like I can say it because of the cultivation factor and the fact that there's a degree of separation, the stuff I'm talking about, it's almost like I can say that because it's not calculated, but the timeless factor is something that I broadly agree with, and again, we didn't calculate it, so I feel like it's okay for me to say that I'm super happy about the fact it's there, because I do broadly agree, because I feel like I don't feel like we're a quote unquote cool band in any way nowadays. And then it's like, but you see other bands and it's like, oh, they would have been cool 30 years ago.
Yeah, totally.
Whereas that doesn't apply to us. Like, I think we would have been equally as uncool 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I reckon we still will be in 10 or 20 or 30 years, which is essentially...
So you say your uncoolness is timeless as well as the music.
Our uncoolness transcends time itself. I think that is the definition of timelessness. I'm very proud of the fact that it's fallen into that kind of groove. Again, it wasn't something calculated.
Not at all.
What we originally intended was very much the opposite. Like if when at the very beginning when we'd started the band, our initial aspiration for it had come to fruition, it probably would have sounded really time-stamped.
Probably,
people would have listened to it and said, that's just like, oh, I get it, it's 2000 Scottish indie music or something like that. It would have had a lot of those tropes, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just through the process that we've just kind of fallen into, we've ended up with stuff where it's like, I listen to it and I go, I don't know how to, it's not harsh noise music or anything, but I'm still like, I don't know how to categorize it. And that's interesting. It's an interesting relationship to have with your own art. It's almost like
it helps that degree of separation, I think, when you listen to it and you don't know how to categorize it.
For sure, yeah.
It's not just timeless in that sense. I think it's out of genre, or it doesn't fit in with any kind of scenes, a horrible word, but do you know what I mean? Now, as you say, there are people that will sound like Scottish noise rock, or there'll be people that sound like that term dream pop, which I'm not entirely sure what it means. But
it means a lot of different things.
Yeah, exactly.
And listen, I'm sure I've written it a few times, but I'm also interested in the other influences that are there, perhaps not music, or perhaps not pop and rock and modern music. Are there other things as well? Because it strikes me that there's almost, with your harmonies in particular, there's almost a kind of choral aspect to it.
Well, I mean, it's everyone in the band you ask will have a different answer for this, again, because we don't set out with anything. I mean, I'm a huge fan of stuff that's harmonically dense. Personally, like I'm a huge... Me, Morgan and Nici are all really big Steely Dan fans.
Me
too. Like Donald Fagen, and like anything involving Michael McDonald, anything that involves really stacked harmonies.
Yeah.
Like, and because Steely Dan harmonies, or like harmonization in the chords Donald Fagen uses, you know, there's been plenty of people who've done papers on this and such. It's essentially choral music. Like, he uses a lot of the same intervals and stuff like that you will hear in, like, it's insane. Like, the Steely Dan rabbit hole is one of the deepest in all of music. It's just like, if it's one of these if you know kind of things. Like, that's, and I feel like for Morgan and Nici especially, that kind of music goes way back.
Oh,
and
yeah,
I feel like there's a
family
kind of,
institution.
Yeah, I feel like there's a dyed-in-the-wool appreciation for harmonic richness. There's a bit at the end of the song, because from a production standpoint, there's a few bits on the album that are big stamps for me on them, which...
What kind of stamps?
As in they're me moments that,
right, okay.
that people have actually told me, oh, that I could tell that was something you would do, and I'm, you know, not entirely sure about the ethics of that, you know, because obviously I've got a lot of production ethics and transparency and stuff like, you know, we don't need to get into that. But either way, things will come through that are very me. There's a moment at the end of The Apostate where the really, really close, the brutally close, the so brutal we can't do it live close harmonies just stick on a loop, and they just keep going. And the reverb turns up and saturates more and more till it's just a blanket. And at the end of Pendulum, transitioning into the song April, where you just have a kind of sea of harmonics, like that kind of thing is...
It's very you.
I live for that kind of thing. I love dense... just dense whole notes of...
which is interesting, actually, because it's a meeting of minds on that front, because Nici and I, you know, of course, have always sung together, and I think she and I both have a huge soft spot for harmonies that not just raise the hairs on the back of your neck, but shouldn't work but do. And I think that's something that we've really tried to not necessarily set out to write and, you know, make happen, but we just do. When it's happened, we've tried our best post to showcase it and go, oh my god, that's a thing that fits perfectly here.
Matthew's the same, because
Matthew's definitely
obviously Matthew originally, when the band started, he was gravitating towards a dark country thing, because he loves his gut-wrenching harmonies as well. Like The Apostate, again, is a song where that's really, really clear. That's essentially us doing a first aid kit song or something. You know, that's the Have Form Things version of that. It's like, what if we put, like, you know, insane intervals over what is in theory just a kind of rolling dark country song. Yes, there's a mutual appreciation for harmony, whether it's between instruments, between voices, just as a broad picture, you know. And there's quite a few little passages like the one at the end of The One You Hate, where if you take the instrumentation away from it, you're listening to it and it sounds like a nightmare. Like, literally sounds like a nightmare. It does not work at all. It's like three voices doing something, but it only makes sense when the rest of the music and there's a root note, you know, underneath it. We spend a lot more time on that than, I mean, maybe not more time than people would realise. Maybe people do think we're very deliberate about what we do, but there's moments in, again, The Apostate. I just mentioned this because the 3-part harmonies in Apostate are so brutal and they're so close. But there are, in the turns between some of the notes and the interaction between the free vocal parts, the guitar chord, the piano chords and the bass, there's some like nigh on unlistenable dissonance in there in little moments. So while when I was in really deep on the mixing side of it, there were bits where I was just going, oh my god, and I was looping these like 0.5 of a second bits just over and over, just going da 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 da, and I'd be like, Morgan, I think this is a mistake, and we'd be mapping out.
Help me!
Yeah, we'd be mapping out.
We got in so deep.
Yeah, we'd be mapping out every single one of those notes on a piano to make sure it was in key. And like most of them they're just really dark. But like there's a lot of harmonic Jenga going on with the album.
absolutely. And I think also the passages again in a pot state. This is. It's potentially a total rabbit hole. I think there's a degree of trauma for the both of us that we haven't yet unpicked. So, just little bits and pieces where we look back, partly due to the fact that it's one of the songs that we struggle with most live, right?
Yes.
Partly due to the fact that these passages involve all of us jumping. There's no if you're a choir person and you go in and you've got your piece of sheet music and you can see your soprano, alto and your bass and everything's going, and following more or less some kind of arc, right? If you put the passages for a postate on a piece of sheet music, it's like I start down the bottom and reach up the top, and Nici takes that top note and takes the bottom note, and then we swap, and then it happens again, and then Matthew slots in, and it's the only way that we would I'm just going to finish that sentence.
We've gotten very far from the brief on this one. So in terms of influences out with artists, there's a shared love of harmony.
I think this is really interesting again because there is something gothic, for want of a better term, about the sound, something a little bit dark and harmonies. Incredible harmonies, but one again, there's this often loud music, not always, but behind it. But yet every instrument is there and on its own. I think talking about Steely Dan and Michael McDonald in particular, it sounds struck to me. Yeah, it's a little bit like if Michael McDonald went to a really dark place and was slightly off, because the harmonies are there, but really, it's like, oh, I'm having a bad day.
That's a huge. Okay, I get that. That's a huge compliment. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
In terms of overall, kind of how sound is your sound is affected. We're sitting in Edinburgh, and it struck me. Edinburgh, to me, coming from Glasgow, is quite a kind of gothic city. And does place kind of have a place for how you sound? Do you feel that at all?
I've never been able to work that out with anything I've ever done. I've never worked it. I mean, I can understand that in the extremes. It's like I went off into the mountains to write an album, and it's all glacial synthesizers or something. It's like, yeah, I can get that. But then when you live in a kind of metropolitan city, is metropolitan the right word? Whatever. Yeah. When you live in just a big city, the thing about trying to categorize cities is that the character of a city can be anything to anyone. It almost depends where you are in that city. It's like, because from our perspective, I still consider Half Formed Things a Leaf band,
right?
Even though now none of us live in Leaf anymore,
except for Matthew.
Matthew sort of. He's on the edge of Leaf, yeah. Because when the band formed, through its kind of most pivotal stages, all the recording of the album and such, we lived in Leaf. And
it was done in our flat in Leith.
Yeah, and I consider us a Leaf band because Leaf's one area of Edinburgh that I can kind of resonate with as this culturally diverse, for now, melting pot of stuff. Edinburgh is not, broadly speaking, a particularly diverse city.
Right.
It's one where the indigenous population is being very much pushed out by soaring costs of living and such, and it's also just a very white city. It's very different to Glasgow in that respect, whereas Leaf feels a lot more optimistic in that respect if you're someone who values culture and who values diversity and such. For me it's impossible to trace how that's influenced the band. It must have. I don't believe it hasn't. but especially given that the four of us all come from different places.
Yeah.
I'm the only Edinburgh native in the band.
Right.
Morgan and Nici are from Australia, Matthew's from Northern Ireland, and we've all just kind of met here, which is quite Edinburgh in a sense. So yeah, there's ways to tie us back. I've always referred to us in press releases and stuff as being, I say that we cast cinematic grandiosity against Edinburgh's Gothic cityscape.
Yeah,
that's the line.
How's that for a line?
Yeah, it's worked for a few years. I mean, and there's a thing there, but as with a lot of the conceptualizing with this band, it's done in retrospect. It's
Right.
like I listen to us, and much like you have kind of come to a conclusion where I go, there is some Gothicness here.
Yeah.
Edinburgh is quite a Gothic city.
Yeah.
I think we're quite an Edinburgh band. I don't actually know what that means.
No.
I just know that there's something there. So yeah, I've been kind of trying to bring those things together and work it out. I'll probably never work out what that is, because again, it could just be that place doesn't affect me personally.
Because I was thinking about albums in particular that feel like one, right, you know, it follows right through, and I think To Live in the Flicker does that as well. You know, it feels like one piece, if you like. You know, I mean, the songs often literally move into one another, but you know, they feel that they all are where they should be and everything. Sure. And it got me thinking about particularly the first Blue Nile album, Walking Across the Rooftops, which, while not sounding similar, doesn't sound like anyone else but them, I think. And I was thinking, well, what makes that bit different? And I often think it is because it's so linked to Glasgow. The Walk Across the Rooftops is the Walk Across Glasgow. And again, this is probably me, but that's kind of what I do, put things onto things. But you know, you've got the church bells at the start and the end of the record, and I just wondered whether this, which seemed to me for some reason like an Edinburgh thing to have happen.
There's layers to that. I actually agree. A part of why I thought it was appropriate is that it is very, to me, it's very Edinburgh. Edinburgh's not the only place that has churches.
No, of course
not. But because that's a church across the road from our flat, so we heard that every Sunday while we were, you know, for the 3 years that we lived there.
Yeah, I think that's
while we wrote the songs, recorded the album. That was just part of the scenery. All of the ambient sounds recorded throughout the album are from outside the window, because that was a big part of the process, or the kind of concept that started to fall into place as we made the album, was wanting, especially because during the production process, Morgan and I were kicked out of our flat because the landlord sold up. So there was this kind of tying a bow on this era of the band, and the location felt inseparable. So it's like, I want to capture the location. Hence the use of ambient sounds. The other layer is just that it's a straight rip-off of Essential World by Kate Bush. Like I thought it would be this wonderful thing where, because I love that album, it's awesome, and I love Kate Bush, and we do a Kate Bush cover at our gig. We've been doing it over the last couple of gigs, almost as a kind of, it's Babushka, it's quite an obvious song, but it's sort of like it's been consistent with all the covers we've done. We did a cover of Prayer to God by Shellac. We did a cover of Hyperballad by Bjork, which is still our most viewed video on YouTube, of course. We've done Fernando by ABBA. We've done a few interesting ones, and they're all kind of like little musical calling cards. You know, it's like, here's the kind of music we like, and through choosing this, and
it's like a list of collective influences,
sort of, and through subverting or not the song in the way we've done, if you get it, you'll get it, kind of thing. Just as a way of reaching out to people, it's like kind of like a wink. And it's the same with the bells, because it's like, the bells that Kate Bush used for Central World sound lovely. The ones we used don't. They're like broken. One of them doesn't work. They sound really quirky and odd. So it's, to me, it sort of felt like a kind of perfect statement of, and again, it's sort of me taking liberties, because it was very much my idea, and again, the ethics of whether or not it's appropriate for me to insert something that's kind of coming from me, but we all agreed on it. But it's sort of a way of saying, we can't do the fancy church bells like Kate Bush can do, but
we've got our own church.
We want to do that kind of thing. So here's our version of it. You know, and that's a very half-formed thing. You know, punching above your weight is it's a very half-formed thing. It's like, we want to be like Kate Bush. So here's our garbage church.
So from that perspective, I think, you know, place to answer your question, place definitely does have a place in our I guess aim.
Well, I mean, it certainly is. Even if, in terms of how the band functions, it's not a prevailing influence. The location of the backdrop of the album production completely permeates it. Like that much is actually that's a very good point.
Is I mean, you can hear what we heard on a daily basis for the entirety of the time that we spent in that flat, which we loved. We absolutely, like, it was the place that we called home first.
Yeah.
You know, we moved in as a couple there, and our band became our band there, and on those streets with those seagulls and that church every fucking Sunday morning waking us up. So it was very much, it was very important to us. I think that, you know, despite the fact it was definitely Edwin's idea, but I think the reason why we were all so on board with it was because it seemed like the perfect way to honour our surroundings and the you know, the bits and pieces that went into the monotony of our daily routine that you can't help but admit permeate what you come up with creatively.
Sure.
It's incredibly difficult to subtract those things from your output.
Definitely.
The live experience. I've seen you a few times play. I've seen you play a few times, and you don't hold back. There's real energy, and I guess what's the drive to play as you do?
It's an outlet.
Because we're terrified.
It's an outlet. It's a kind of release.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think also because I think it's probably something different for everyone.
I was going to say, I definitely feel that way.
Yeah, for me, it's an outlet. Partly due to the fact that we play so seldom.
Yeah.
Which I think we're, you know, in agreement that won't end up being the case for much longer.
Yeah, we're going to start playing more,
far more often over the next year or so. Yeah. But yeah, I think nerves is a big thing,
right?
But it's also due to the fact that we don't play that often. But yes, for me, it's an outlet because for me, the ability to connect with the people that I'm closest to, on a level that's beyond verbal communication. Is, I think, one of the most precious aspects of our relationship as a unit for me, especially because when you work so closely with people who you are close with, there's a lot of shit that goes unsaid, and there's a lot of stuff that happens that, you know, you might not talk about at the time and might sort of hold on to or set to the side. And I think there's an aspect of our live performance that is that stuff coming out. I feel that way quite strongly.
There's a ceremonial aspect to it. You know, it's almost like you're coming together to kind of renew your creative vows.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, it's because
that's a really beautiful way of looking at it.
You know, it's like you're all coming together and going, well, if I don't like this music anymore, I'm about to get up and play it for half an hour, so I'm going to know by the end of it. You know, every time you do it, you're all collectively reassessing and reaffirming your kind of commitment to it. That's a big thing, I think.
Do you think that's also down to the fact that we don't play that often as well? I mean, if we played more often, that aspect might start to wane a bit.
Maybe. I mean, from my perspective, in terms of the initial question, I personally think we play the way we play mostly because it fits the material we're currently playing, especially when you saw us in Glasgow. That would have been a broadcast with Elspeth.
Yeah. That was quite a while ago now.
The set list we were doing there was pretty kind of like bangers heavy. Like it was quite full on. It's a thing we've actually been kind of working against because, you know, we all kind of agree it doesn't serve the dynamic range of the band to be on 10 all the time. So, and again, the more you play live, like not just broadly but like in succession, the more dates you play, the more you settle into a groove where you feel comfortable going down to 40%, so
Right.
so that you can take it up to 100%.
Yeah,
on the
sure,
levels.
sure.
And we're continually trying to improve that.
Yeah.
The last show we did actually in Glasgow, our album launch, funnily enough,
Yeah.
our album launch was a good example of us, just because we had some technical problems.
Yeah.
There were issues of monitoring, so that was an example of us playing kind of old school, where we were just thrashing, especially me, like, because I couldn't hear anything. I was just kind of thrashing away without much dynamic range for much of the set, whereas the Glasgow show we played last Saturday, it's probably the closest we've ever come to like the kind of platonic ideal of dynamic range.
Yeah.
Because
And I
it was
think
just really controlled and that sort of thing.
We were chilled out about it because it wasn't our show.
Yeah, well,
As
that's
well.
also part of it
And
as
I
well.
think
yeah.
and I think the community vibe of Flying Moon, which, you know, is a really beautiful festival that's focused on women in music and making sure that there's a 50-50 even display gender-wise, and showcasing a femme-centric
Sure.
what's the word I'm looking for? Femme-centric.
Femme-centric.
Yeah.
Which, you know, you only need to look at the Transmit lineup from this year or whatever to understand that.
We could have another hour on that.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so-
you don't need to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah,
But
right.
yeah, so but I think also the community vibe there, and feeling like we were boosted. The organizer Nicole really boosted us and did a lot of
great.
work for us, and
Yeah.
a lot of marketing for us, and we felt incredibly supported and incredibly important.
Yeah.
Which was beautiful, and I think all of these things added to a collective vibe between the four of us, in which we could all kind of rest on our backbones and go, you know what, we're here to play the show because somebody asked us to come here and play the show, and they're you know, they really like us and they want to showcase us, and
Yeah.
they think we're important, so let's just have a really nice time with this and do the thing that we know we love doing. And we did, and we like each of us came off that stage feeling like we had reconnected as a unit, which, you know, was
Yeah, it was
important, was really, really important.
Yeah.
Because after the album, you know, it was, I think there was a bit of a lull for our relationships. We needed to patch a few bits and pieces, you
Yeah.
know, and kind of reestablish some of the love, and remember what it was that brought us together in the first place, and feed that. And I feel that gig did a lot of that for us. So yeah, it was important on a number of different fronts.
See, it's interesting being in the audience, the things that are going on stage, and you have no idea,
Yeah.
you know, of the dynamics that
Oh,
are going
man,
on
no.
and the thoughts that are going
Yeah,
on,
yeah.
because you need to say, wow, these guys are really going for it. And we said at the beginning, well, we were nervous, or we were, you know, and you don't get that at all. But what I do get from seeing you play live, and from talking to you tonight, and from the record as well, is that there's a commitment to what you do, and also this commitment to each other, which I think is rare.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's less, that has less to do with anything great that we've done. It's more to do with just the quite complex, like we were alluding to before, the complex microdynamics that already existed.
Mm-hmm.
This band can't function like any other band I've been in before, because and that's very much a double-edged thing, because when things get fraught in the band, they get really fraught. Like if Morgan and I have a fight at practice, we have to take that home with us after.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
When we were making the album in
Yeah.
our flat,
We never got to shut the door on it.
we never got to shut the door on it
At
ever.
all.
Like,
So Nici and Matthew would go home, and we.
well, yeah, and I was just left with it all the time, and that's a dangerous thing to jump into. And you know, I from my perspective at least, I was super reckless in how I jumped into it, and I didn't realize how
We both were.
how deep you can go down the rabbit hole with that kind of thing. But the plus side of it is that there's lots of different ways that it's in a practical sense, it's actually very beneficial. You know, this band is more accustomed to touring, for example, than any other band I've been in before, because if you've got a bunch of dudes who, you know, see each other once a week to play music, but otherwise don't know each other that well, you know, and this happens all the time. It's really common. The first tour just
it's the
breaks.
last
It's
tour.
like it's like, oh my god, I have to spend an extended period of time with you, and I realised I hate you, or oh, I didn't realise you were so racist. Oh my god, whatever comes out. Whereas this band is completely future-proofed against that kind of
That's
thing.
true. That's really
it's
true.
we'll fight over what colour the t-shirt should be or something like that far more ferociously than any other band of just a bunch of friends who will keep it quite civil, and they'll maybe
And then, but exceedingly, they'll be like, I can't believe he's wearing that t-shirt.
they'll whine about it later on or something, but otherwise they'll let it go. Whereas for us, there's a lot of fraught interaction within the band that goes into everything. But
there's a safety in that, though, isn't there? Because
Exactly.
I think like we all sort of made a commitment to each other to be each other's allies, and we're all incredibly aware of and passionate about making sure that our dynamic is one that boosts and supports our mental health as individuals and as individual musicians as well.
Sure.
And that's taken quite a long time to cultivate and to
still working on it.
we are still working on it, because it's an ever evolving thing, isn't it? Because it changes. Your emotional landscape changes consistently, and so you have to build a relationship that has the ability to adapt with those changes. And Matthew's joked for years that he's married to the both of us, and it's true. We're all very much that close. We spend that much time with each other, and as a unit, there's you need to know that the people who are in that kind of dynamic with you and in that sort of abandon with you, that you have a safety in letting go.
Yeah,
for sure.
Definitely.
I mean, when I said it was rare, and you said, well, it's not something special that we do. I think sometimes things can be rare just because they come together in that way. And I think that's what you've got as a band, without a doubt. A while ago now, do you know, this is one of these ones I usually keep a keen eye on the time. I have no idea how long we've been talking. This could be
waffling on.
No, it's great. It's fantastic. But right at the beginning, I asked you about names and half-formed things. So I'm now going to finish, because my second question, which I never actually really got to, was to live in the flicker. Why to live in the flicker?
Right. Okay. So this
again another retrospective.
So one of our friends, one of Morgan's very old friends, who's a playwright called Kendall Fever. She's Australian.
Plug.
She's
Check
really
her out.
she's a real singular mind. Like, she's fantastic. She had a play out last year called The Almighty Sometimes, which was astonishing. Could rabbit hole in this for ages, but I just strongly advise you check her out. She was staying with us one time, and she said a good name.
It was a postcode. A postcard.
Oh, was it a postcard?
It was
right,
a postcard. It was up on the fridge.
Right. So she suggested we call our album "We Live in a Flicker," which, I googled it, and it was from Heart of Darkness.
Yeah.
And the quote basically, and it's a wonderful. I actually talked about this in an interview we did with a blog recently. Mm-hmm. The sentiment of the original quote is that human existence is just a dash of lightning across the sky, and we live in that. And it's a really beautiful sentiment. But I felt like, because the variation to live in the flicker came from me kind of messing around with it, because I felt like saying we live in a flicker, it kind of positions you outside of it. Like, you're kind of top down looking at everything, which is fine. That's one way of looking at things, but it kind of clashes with the way that the album's written, because the songs on the album are very much kind of like abstract vignettes they heavily place you inside things that are going on, and it's never particularly clear. It's quite PJ Harvey in a way. There's no beginning or end. You're just in for a little second, and you're kind of out of it again. And I felt like something about that sentiment is perfect, and it resonates with the songs on the album, but it's looking it's positioning itself outside of it, and there's kind of an aloofness there of it isn't necessarily good aloofness. So I kind of changed it around to firmly place the perspective inside it, and it's like, okay, so human existence is a flash of lightning across the sky, but I'm going to push all the way into that.
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of became. So yeah, so Kendall absolutely gets credit for essentially naming the album. Because you know, I when we got it, we were like, oh, that's it.
That's
but
perfect.
Initially, it was the name of a song. Initially, it was the name of The Apostate,
Right.
which is interesting. And we had never actually had a conversation about the title for the album. And this is kind of when we were getting close to. I think this was just before recording. I think
We decided we found
either just before or just after. We need to name it, and we had quite a lot of disagreements as to what we were going to call it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like self-titled. Should it be this? Should it be named after a particular tune? And To Live in the Flicker was kind of put forward as a name, but The Apostate is quite a singular song on the album.
Yeah.
It kind of sticks out, and I was like, well, I don't want that to be the title track, because if that's a title track, people will put specific importance on it,
Yes.
and that'll just skew the entire album. So we took a decision to take the title off of that, give it to the album, and rename it The Apostate. And that all happened in the same 30 seconds. Like, it was literally like, okay, fine, so we're just going to call the album it. And Matthew was like, what do we call it? I'm fairly certain I literally just went, the Apostate, because I asked him what the song was about, and the Apostate is about someone
Who renounces faith, no?
It's literally about someone renouncing their faith. Essentially, it's more abstract than that, and it's more subjective than that, but essentially, so we just literally called it The Apostate. Anyway, long roundabout way, that's kind of where the title for the album comes from. It's sort of a retrospective reflection upon listening to the album and reading the lyrics of what the album's getting at, inadvertently.
So if we do live in the flicker, this is what it's like to live in the flicker. This is how you can.
Well, yeah. It's
essentially, yeah. I mean,
it's just windows, isn't it? It's windows into aspects of human existence.
Yeah.
And I think that's why when we all saw the photograph that is now the album art, we all, I think actually the first reaction was silence.
Yeah.
And then I can't remember who it was, but somebody said, "Holy shit!" It was probably Matthew.
Probably.
That's very much a Matthew thing. And
it's perfect.
It is perfect to me. To me, it's very much, and I should credit Edwin's sister Louise, who has done a lot of our visual pieces. She's an incredibly talented artist who you should definitely check out. Her last name is also McLachlan.
Yes, yeah. She does abstract art photography.
Yes.
It's she's almost indescribably talented. Or she has so many strings to her bow.
She really
does so much stuff.
It's a beautiful cover. I mean, I would say you should have the record anyway, but if not, get it, hang it on your wall. I mean, it's a beautiful piece.
It is. I feel incredibly. There was definitely a kind of panic almost in me when we chose a cover art, I believe, just before we started tracking, I think, and it added this kind of, that might not be true actually, maybe just after we finished tracking. Either way, it added this just weight to the whole thing, because it's an amazing piece of art, and it was like, Jesus Christ, that's our album cover. You know, so it better not suck. You know, it was really because it is so perfect.
It is totally perfect.
It felt like a real blessing, because it is a real blessing for us to have it and be able to use it to, you know, sell half an hour of music. You know,
again, another timeless piece. You don't have a.
It is timeless. Yeah.
There is no timestamp when you look at that photo, and I think the most beautiful aspect of it is that it is a quintessential visual representation of what the album has come to mean, because it looks like you're looking in a window, watching somebody in a mundane, run-of-the-mill act.
Yeah.
Right? Is she bending down to get something? Is she getting out of a shower? Is she getting out of bed? Is she in pain? Is she getting out of a chair? Like you don't know what it is, right?
Yeah.
But it invokes such a sense, like you can't look at it and then look away. You have to keep looking.
Yeah.
And
all four of us see it. Yeah. Differently as well. Like, it literally couldn't be a more perfect cover for a Half Foreign Things
Yeah.
album. Like it's just we are incredibly lucky. Like,
We are
it's
very
just
lucky.
And I think
amazing.
it is the perfect cover, because what I would say, having listened to the album a lot now, each time I come to the different tracks, something new comes out. You know,
Right.
something,
Yeah, yeah.
a new angle or a new. Oh, I didn't hear that before. Or and I think that was partly, as you say, the production is. You know, you pick up different things each time.
Sure.
But also, I think it's almost like going back and reading your favourite short story. You think, well, I missed that the first time round, or anything like that.
Yeah.
I think that's the perfect place to leave it. So thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Edwin, for speaking to us today.
That's a
No,
pleasure.
thank you so much for being
And for goodness
Thank
sake,
you for having
everyone,
us.
go out and have To Live in the Flicker. It's a great record. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.
Mother,